Greetings, brothers and sisters. So Prince Philip died, which most of you probably already know. What many of you might not know was Prince Philip was very good friends with this guy, Jimmy Savile. And Jimmy Savile, here he is with Princess Di and the Queen. And he is a guy who was like the Dick Clark of England. There's a great video about him like being a wizard or something like this.
His co-workers suspected he was a witch.
This is from a documentary entitled Was Jimmy Savile a Witch? And you can see here it says he was born on Halloween in 1926. He was the seventh son, and his co-workers suspected he was a witch, and then he goes to tell this story.
As a Bevan boy, Jimmy Savile's fellow miners thought Jimmy Savile was a witch.
So this is, coal mines, right? He has this story here.
Now then, nobody but nobody ever did 8 hours down a pit and came back as immaculate as the set-off with white shirt and everything like that. They were quite convinced I was a witch. If you go to South Kirby now, you'll get some of the old miners when you say, Jimmy Savile's done well, hasn't he? Ah, and he'll look around and he'll say, he's not what you think you know. The forces of darkness are at work there.
The forces of darkness are at work there. So here he is, really good friends with Prince Charles. But here he is again with Prince Philip and Jimmy Savile, who had all these victims, horrible person. And he was able just to walk into Buckingham Palace. And he was good friends with all these people. Like he could just walk in. Here he is with Prince Philip again. I mean, Jimmy Savile is always with the royal family. And to get that kind of privilege, to be able to just walk into the royal household, if you've watched The Crown, you get a better sense of this. The security that you'd have to go through so that you could do that would be immense, right? They would have to find out everything about you so there wouldn't be any scandal. I mean, the royal family is very worried about scandal. I mean, that's one of their number one things is not to have a scandal, and to have this guy be just basically a part of their family. There he is with his Margaret Thatcher. Would be, something that they would make sure wouldn't happen. They knew everything about him. And, when this stuff came out, they tried to distance themselves from him. But, they really couldn't because he was a part of their family. And he was able to just, do whatever he wanted with them. So, this guy, Prince Philip, and there were so many ghoulish pictures of him, and I just made so many recent videos about the royal family. I didn't know how much power they have. 1/6 of the world's acreage, 6.6 billion acres of land, right? Just, which is an interesting number. We've talked about this. And just all the influence of the Queen on governments and the crown and just the power that they have. And Prince Philip was just this creepy guy, this ghoulish guy, and, all of it, right? And so his dying, the royal family is something that should have went away. Like the concept of royal family, so much of the abusive, things that people are talking about, abuse came from the idea of royalty, where people thought they were better by blood. I mean, that's the ultimate and sort of the foundational principle behind racism and slavery and all these things. People thinking that their blood, their genetics was superior, that they were like chosen in some way. They were chosen to be above other people. And, that's been, we've seen how that's played out and its effect on the world. And the royal family is, it's just a disaster and a cancer on humanity. So anyways, I had this kind of bummer experience. I ended up looking at Facebook, which, always ends up in a bummer experience. I've known about this for a while, and just, sometimes you know things mentally, but it doesn't really affect you or it doesn't really hit you, in terms of like a real deep realization. Like, it's there, but you never really think about how, something with the royal family. Like, I always knew the royal family sucked and it was a negative thing. It was a plague on humanity. But when I heard that they own 1/6 of the world's land, I mean, think about one family owning 1/6 of the world's land. That changes a lot, right? You have a better perspective of it, and then all the pageantry of the royal family and all the show and all the branding and stuff. It's I mean, they could literally feed the world, right? And so I've known this for a while, and I want to get into the liberal side of it because it was a reaction to some of one of my liberal friends on Facebook. A sort of liberal friend, not like a what people think about liberals in the truth community, but someone who was a like a real liberal, someone who was a good person living off the grid. And I'll explain more about that story in a moment. But what I've realized is, on a deeper level, that the people that control the system have won, especially to do with COVID and Trump to whatever extent, at dividing the country so flagrantly, so meticulously, that people now just do whatever they think their side, the people that in their demographic believe in, they just accept things without any research. I mean, this is people in the truth community as well. That people, even with the internet now and all this research and information, people are so rigid in their belief systems and their identification with certain groups. And again, the truth community may be worse than any other group at this. And so it's like, almost like pointless to even, I mean, I guess there's some people who are open or whatever, and there's people who say they benefit from my videos. So, I'll keep on plugging along. But in terms of affecting or changing the opinion of people in, the majority of people, it's just not going to happen. People are locked in until it collapses. I mean, until there's significant changes that might rattle people so much that they, are open to something new and something, a different perspective that outside of their rigid inner belief systems. And there's so much anger and hatred out there. I mean, it's just, like much worse, even with more information and more, I mean, just so much more in terms of people's ability to conceptualize things and, and just all of it. A change in consciousness. There's a shift in consciousness and a spiritual awakening like never before that's possible. I mean, I've talked about the heartfulness meditation. And so I want to get to this liberal story in a second, but first let's talk about the truth community, the right-wing end of the truth community, and people who are Trumpers, QBs, and right-wing people. And so what Fox News did and Alex Jones did is that they monetized outrage. And then so many other people followed suit. This was stuff that happened with the Q community. This has happened with, people in the right-wing end of the truth community. What they did is find things, and you'll see this over and over again. This is, how they create content. This is how Fox creates content. All these other right-wing, Newsmax and whatever that other one's called. And how these personalities, these right-wing personalities create content. They find things that are outrageous and that are going to freak out the traditional people who subscribe to Fox News or, any of these types of belief systems. They find things that are going to make you freak out if you are, one of these people. And then they just maximize exaggerating and, just using, like I said, music, manipulative tools to make it sound way worse than it is. And they make it bigger and more comprehensive. Because if it's just like one individual, I was talking to my wife about this last night because she had heard this story about something. She forwarded a story about something that was from, that happened in Minnesota, and a judge made a sort of horrible ruling, an interpretation of a law. But it was just one judge. It wasn't the whole state. It wasn't the law, right? It wasn't something that was comprehensive. And so, they take things that are, one weird person, one odd person. They find a liberal professor that says this, or they find some obscure liberal publication or website, and they make it sound like that's what every, person, every Democrat believes, right? And they, put the music behind it. I mean, I just saw this with even the Daily Show. They did it to Tucker Carlson. Like, in the truth community, Alex Jones has been doing this for years, putting doomsday music behind stuff. I mean, it's used on both sides. And so the left looked at this the way Fox News and then Alex Jones and all these other people were doing this, people on the right, people in the truth community, and CNN and MSNBC and the whole, Democratic Party and all these people, celebrities, started to do it even worse, right? And they had Trump, who was just this, walking outrage machine for the left, right? Who was just tweeting things on a daily basis that was, inflammatory to them. And they were using this to create fear and outrage. It's the Chicken Little model. The sky is falling. And so because of that polarization, and because of, people being freaked out, there's so much fear around the COVID thing, that now people who used to use critical thinking skills and used to stray outside the lines a little bit aren't doing that anymore. They're just running back to the beast. And so I had this realization because when my family and I had our first homestead, there was this wonderful couple that lived near us, and they were completely off the grid. They had, skills that me and my family didn't have, right? They were, the husband of the family was a good builder. Like, he knew how to build things, and he built this tiny house, and it was spectacular. They bought shared land with their, one of their relatives, and they had 16 acres back away from the road, kind of isolated. And they had like a goat, and they had an epic garden. They had a really great garden. And they had an unbelievable spring. The water from the spring was just cold and delicious. I mean, like pure water, just fresh water, right? Vibrant with life from, moving along in the spring. And they pumped the spring water up to their house, and they would also lug it up to their house. And, they had like an outhouse, and they were off the grid. There's no electricity. And eventually they bought a yurt. And so they were, expanding their sort of compound they were building. They just had a baby when we sold our house, so they were starting to have a family and all these things. And the girl, the wife of the family, was really good at foraging. She had gone to school, and she knew like the genus of plants, and they just they were good gardeners, but also good foragers. And like I said, they were off the grid. They were really doing it. And the parents of the girl were some of the pioneers of homeschooling. Like, lots of people don't understand this, but homeschooling wasn't accepted. Like anything new, anything different, most states, even cities didn't allow people to homeschool. They would make your kids go to school, right? And if you didn't, you would be reported to whatever, DSS or something. And if your kids did get homeschooled, colleges wouldn't accept them, right? Wouldn't validate the education they got at home. Now it's just the opposite. Colleges prefer homeschoolers for the simple reason that homeschoolers, and not all homeschoolers are great, right? It's, you're relying on how good a teacher the parent is. But for the most part, kids who are homeschooled are much better at learning on their own, and they still like to learn. Like, schools often take the joy of learning. I mean, think about that, because learning is so important, learning and growing. But kids in public schools don't like to learn, right? They're resistant to learning because they have such a bad school experience. So colleges have recognized that. But years and years ago, none of that was there. And so we had these parents that we met. We met them like one or two times, of this, this family, this couple. This couple had, when we went away, they milked our cow, and they weren't really eating dairy, but they just wanted to learn to milk a cow, and they wanted to help us out because when you milk a cow, you got to do it every day. So it's hard to find people who know how to milk a cow, right? So they filled in for us for a couple of times. They were just great. They were knowledgeable and had a lot of positive energy. And so we met the girls' parents, and they were some of the, the founders of homeschooling that went to, battle with state laws, state legislators, and got homeschooling approved in one of the, early states to adopt it. And so you had these pioneers that did this work that all of us are now benefiting from, especially now with COVID, that there is, it's legal to homeschool, and it's actually looked upon positively by educational systems and colleges and things like this. And so I was, I don't go on Facebook very much in terms of my personal page, and now even less because of I have to switch out of my Pockets of the Future account and go to my personal account. And, sometimes I get messages on both accounts, but, I just never really scroll through Facebook. Very seldom do I do that. If there's an alert, someone says, somebody shared one of my videos or, said something, mentioned me in a comment or something like that, I get notified by Facebook. I'll click on that, but just scrolling through Facebook, I just don't have the time for it. And, I was making a video yesterday, and I clicked on my Facebook page for some reason, and I saw these two women, a mother and a daughter. The daughter was in her 20s, and the mother was, older, 50s, and they were, masked up, and they were proudly displaying Band-Aids on their arms. And I thought one of my truther friends posted it, but I looked at the name and I saw it was this young woman from this off-the-grid couple. And I was kind of stunned because they were completely into alternative health care, and, they were not really truthers. They were, there's liberal truthers, and there is conservative truthers, and then there's truthers that are neither, that are a mix of those things. And most people are, used to be a mix. Like people, have different beliefs about different things, and they believe some conservative things, they believe some liberal things, whatever. But now it's like people are getting more and more rigid about their group and their belief system. And so this young woman who is an off-the-grid liver, and somebody who is certainly was not bought into the official story and eating healthy foods. So you have lots of people who are completely into organic healthcare, organic foods and things like this, growing their own food. But now with Trump, and then really with COVID and all the fear that is created, they are running back to the beast. And this is happening on the right and the left. But people are looking at their demographic and saying, what are we doing? Like, what do we believe? What do, their family and friends, because I read through the comments, right? Which, like I just never do. But all these siblings, these homeschooled siblings that were some of the first homeschooled kids, and, these other people who are into alternative things, were all congratulating her and her mother for this act that they were talking about being able to live their lives again. And then they were, they had already had it done and all these things. And, I was kind of struck by it because it's just everybody's becoming more rigid about what they believe and clinging to their demographic, and it's breaking up along, these belief systems and along racial lines and along, all these various categories that people have placed people in. And you're like, well, what do my people believe in? Like, what am I as a person? Which group do I fit in? And what do those people in that group do? And I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to research it myself. I'm not going to make a individual decision. I've talked about how I made this video entitled Read the Ingredients, how exhausting it is to, once you don't trust the food, once you don't trust the medicine, once you don't trust the government, once you don't trust the media, then you have to research everything, and it's exhausting. It's why that guy, Cypher, in the first Matrix movie, wanted to go back into the Matrix, right? It was just better to be a sheeple. It's just better to, trust the system, trust it completely, because, it's better in the sense of being easier. It's not healthier. It's not being a fully functioning human being, but it's exhausting constantly having to read the ingredients. And now with the alternative media being compromised with the QBs and the far right wing and things like that and disinformation agents that are, government trolls or whatever, and they're putting out all this false information that people are devouring. So you have to double check, even triple check, even be more vigilant about the stuff in the truth community, because people just share stuff that isn't true, and it's really destructive. It takes people in the wrong direction. It's inflammatory, and it gives the truthers a bad name. So it's just an absolute mess right now. Like, they clearly, the people who control the system have, dealt with the problem of information on the internet. Like, they got people even more indoctrinated, right? I learned a long time ago not to argue with people, and it's not my responsibility to wake people up, to save them, to, get them to change their minds, or even, prevent them from going off a cliff. It just, if I'm talking to somebody and I, mention something that's a little bit alternative and they're like not into it, I just, all right, cool. I'll just save my energy. everyone's got to make their own choices, and the system can't be saved. Like, it's, the people are wrecked. Like, the people are completely broken in one way or another. Low functioning, entitled, and just along you can check every box. Physical health, worse, right? Mental health, worse. Vocabulary, less, right? Ability to articulate and communicate with other people, worse, right? Everything that you can think of. People's ability to critical think, worse. Their connection to God, less, or even non-existent. Their understanding of their soul and, the spiritual realm of existence, even worse and less, or non-existent. And so, all across the board, people are getting worse. And the system is, so far in debt, and it's so ass backwards. I mean, it's upside down like an upside down mortgage, and upside down like an upside down, inverted cross. I mean, it's upside down in every possible way. And so it's taking people in the wrong direction. And it's, the system should have collapsed years ago, but they've invoked all kinds of just really, shady, illusionary type of tactics to just prop the system up and keep it going, because nobody's ready for it to collapse. Nobody has the skills anymore to, survive a systemic collapse. And so, I mean, there's nothing really to do here. It's very, you can't really work with people, most of them. I mean, all I can say is, the Heartfulness system of meditation helps people connect to God. And those of you who are open to it, it's a way to at least advance spiritually. It's at least to, make something out of this mess that is, your life and the collective lives of everybody going in the wrong direction, and build a spiritual relationship while living your normal life, like, engaging in whatever you have to do, your duties and your, wants and desires and things, but also spending some time cultivating an internal relationship with God that you can keep after you die, that will, move forward in, future existence here or somewhere else, more than likely here, but who knows for each person. Because, it's just becoming more and more of a complete shit show. Like, it's just, I mean, I was, like I said, I usually don't get very affected, but these were people I was connected to. And the fact they just didn't even question the mainstream story. So many people aren't. And specifically on the left, because anything that is pro-Trump is bad. Anything that they consider, pro-Trump. And part of that now for many people is the so-called truth community. So they're abandoning that. They're so fearful because of COVID that they are, running back to the beast and saying, what can we do? What are we supposed to do to, what can we do to avoid this calamity? And they're like, well, this is what you do. And they go, all right, whatever you say, whatever you say, master. I mean, that's, people on the left, but people on the right are, again, they just are locked into this state of perpetual outrage, and fear-based stuff, and the sky is falling, and aren't really doing anything. How many people are actually doing something to prepare for the collapse? Like just reading stuff on the internet and feeling bad and feeling overwhelmed. And, there's lots of sites there's all these truther sites and there's all these right-wing sites, and all they do is bring you down, right? All they do is tell you everything's going to, going in the wrong direction. They don't have any real solutions, and they don't offer anything up. And, at the end of the day, this is God's plan. The system is bad, and, even if it wasn't bad, things come to an end because they have to. Even good systems come to an end, and this isn't a good one. It's just that we're 100% dependent on it, and we don't want to hear that. Like, nobody wants to go to God and ask, God, what's the plan? And God is, people have this idea about God being a being, right? This idea that man was made in God's image, but that's not, that's true, but not in the way that people think. God is the basis of everything. Love, the love energy, the essence of love is the medium for all creation, is the baseline for everything. And then everything's, a perverted version of that. And not perverted in, the way that people think of a negative way. It's just a grosser version of love. It's not love in its pure form, but everything is built out of love, right? It's the foundational building blocks of all creation. And so that's God, and God is in everything. But God isn't a being like people think. We've been told that God is like a man with a, ego. And I mean, you look at the Old Testament, and God was angry, and God got his feelings hurt, and he was lashing out. He was narcissistic. I mean, the way they presented God is completely wrong. And so, for primitive people, sure, primitive people who don't have the ability for abstract thought, yeah, maybe they had to think of God that way. But as you evolve and your consciousness evolves, you can understand that God is, this feeling, this essence of love that's all pervading, and it's in every cell of your body, and it's in every particle, and it's the basis of all creation. God doesn't have an ego. God doesn't have a mind. God doesn't think like we do. God creates, but automatically, perfectly. God is perfect because God doesn't, think things, think himself out of doing the right thing. You know how people are, right? Like, we question everything. Sometimes people make the wrong decisions. Some people make the right decisions. But, there's always some hemming and hawing. There's worrying, all these things. It's not clean, but God just does everything perfectly because there's no, mental, psychological drama and consciousness, the consciousness we have of our own existence. Like God's not even conscious of his own existence. So like God is perfect because he's not going to overthink things or do things based in his desires the way people do. But where we're similar is we have the capacity to manifest reality the same way God does, except it's different because it's ego-based and it is, centralized to our own physical existence and limited to our capacity and our spiritual proximity to God. And so God doesn't get bad news. Like God doesn't, oh, wow, that bums me out. Like God, that's that's not something that happens to God because God doesn't have preferences. God is perfect because God can only love. God can't do any of the things, the spiteful things that have been attributed to God in various religions and things. God can only be loving. God can only love. That's why there needs to be higher developed souls that monitor everything because they have minds and egos and identity and consciousness. And the closer they are to God, the more pure that is. And they can, help monitor the system. They can help oversee God's creation and understand the nature of God and become the divinized version of themselves, the best version of themselves, spiritual version of themselves, and to rise to the highest levels of consciousness and turn into a service-oriented person where they're serving God all the time and no, thought of what their preferences are or things like this, only in a very nominal sense, a very light sense, right? But most people, they don't want to hear the plan, right? Like the real plan. They don't want to hear the system is bad for them and that it's, can't be fixed and they need to adapt new ways and change and accept that the system needs to collapse. So most people just can't hear that. And you can see it right in front of you. People are all desperately trying to cling to some group and think they're superior because they're in that group. And, and everybody's been victimized by the other groups and everybody needs, they need to control the other groups and cancel them because they're running the world into the ground. But the system is collapsing because it should, like it needs to. It's time, and it's just better for everyone. It's not that I want it to collapse because I'm as dependent on it as you are. I've just accepted it because I can see it, and there's just no turning back, right? And so preparing oneself and preparing your family and especially your children to live in a world where the system isn't going to take care of you, and that might be, next year, it might be in the next 50 years, but you'll see consistent changes and things are just going to get worse until it collapses. The system is just going to go in the wrong direction like it is now until it collapses. And that's, the reality that nobody wants to accept. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.